HR supply chain, highlighting and showcasing solutions for the most complex challenges facing the industry in 21st century by our team of subject matter experts and mentors. Broadcasting every week, all year round, we will present the most up-to-date series of podcasts and webinars.
Hello and welcome to another new episode of Bicara Supply Chain. This is Nur Hadi House. My guest today is Masoud, a co-founder of Ponera Group, and he is based in Switzerland. So thank you for being here, Masoud. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So in today's episode, we are going to talk about the green logistic implementations. But before we get started, could you please brief a little bit about yourself and your professional background?
Briefly about myself, I'm Masoud. Originally, I come from Middle East, and I want to start with this fact because it had a great impact on my interest and approach towards sustainability and, in general, environmental awareness. Because I grew up seeing the first-hand impacts of climate change, irresponsible consumption of resources, and poor management of waste. If I want to tell you more specifically about myself, I have an engineering background. I have a PhD in chemical engineering. Throughout these years, I worked on design, modeling, and development of sustainable processes and technologies for chemical industry with focus on using renewable sources. About 3-4 years ago, I started my entrepreneurial journey where, with a friend of mine who was also my classmate, we recognized the high amounts of waste in industrial packaging. By industrial packaging, I mean pallets, crates, and related products, which are mainly made from wood. We started as a project, which turned into a startup called Ponera Group, and we are working on bringing our modular, durable, and digitally enabled industrial packaging to the market. It was about 2 years ago that I started working on a project which resulted in co-founding my second startup called Captis. There we are working on a solution for onboard mobile CO2 capture kit for fossil fuel-based vehicles like trucks, boats, or any other vehicle that works with internal combustion engine. And our focus is on developing a product that is more suitable for fleet owners in the logistics network.
So talking about the green logistic, what is meant by green logistic and how does it work?
Well, green logistics is referring to all the efforts and practices to minimize the environmental impact of the logistics operations and activities. More precisely, example of these efforts are reflected in policies, measures, operations, control systems, or equipment and technologies that are being used within the network. And the environmental impact itself is not only about CO2 emissions, but in a greater picture, it should include other pollutions and emissions such as chemical pollutants, waste, or noise pollutions. We also need to include contamination or even consumption of all other resources. All in all, these factors can be regarded as environmental impact or footprint. Before going further into the discussion, I would like to briefly talk about the difference between sustainable and green logistics. In many cases, these two terms are used interchangeably. However, some see a slight difference between the two and consider sustainable logistics a more general term. In this perspective, green logistics is purely focused on environmental compliance of logistics activity. And on the other hand, sustainable logistics has a more business-oriented approach, where apart from environmental impact, other factors such as risks and costs are also taken into account. For the sake of simplicity, we can keep the two terms equivalent for this conversation, but I thought maybe it's important to mention it. Going back to the question, traditionally, logistics is solely focused on operations without considering the environmental impact, which is the main difference between traditional logistics and green logistics. To answer your question on how green logistics work, I think we need to first understand what is referred to as the three pillars of green logistics, where first one is environment, which I think is pretty clear. Second is economy, for example, the impacts on the revenues, profit margins of business, or the business opportunities in general, such aspects. And third is society, where the demands from the market and political views that impact the policies can both be very important. Only by considering these three pillars together, we can look for feasible and sustainable solutions. In the next level and in practice, the activities towards green logistics can vary depending on the industry. There are many ways of categorizing such strategies and practices, but they are mainly focused on three goals, which are increasing efficiency, or in other words, optimizing the operations, reducing the carbon footprint, and reducing consumption. Interestingly, as one might conclude, all of these actions are in line with cutting costs of logistic operations. Now, going through all these strategies is not the main purpose for this conversation, but I would like to mention two of the main topics that are receiving huge attention these days, and in my opinion, are the most effective ways towards green logistics. The first one is circular logistics, where by incorporating concepts such as reusing, refurbishing or repurposing, and recycling, we see dramatic and fast improvements towards implementation of green logistics. Mm-hmm. And the second interesting topic is decarbonizing. I really like decarbonizing because in my perspective, it has the most direct impact on reducing the environmental footprint. Some of the examples are using alternative fuels, alternative materials, or something that is getting more attention in recent years are carbon capture technologies, either direct air or on-site capture of CO2 emissions from emitters. Of course, all of these topics face challenges towards their implementation, but we don't want to go through it here. All in all, there is a lot more to talk about on what is green logistics and how it works, but I hope this brief introduction is sufficient and helpful.
All right, so I want to back these questions. Why is green logistic matters today, and what are the major benefits for the people, for society, and for a business itself?
Very good question, actually. In terms of benefits, apart from the obvious environmental impacts, there are many other benefits. For example, decreasing the costs. Remember, green logistics in its core contributes to increasing efficiencies, which translates to reductions in costs. There are other benefits, for example, which comes from increasing transparency that helps fighting illegal activities. These are just few examples, but the list goes on. In a more general aspects on why green logistics matter, there are many reasons for going towards green logistics, but there are two drivers that, in my opinion, indicate the pace towards going green. First one is the demand from the consumers. Nowadays, it is undeniable that consumers demand for more green products, which is the result of increase in the eco-consciousness of societies. Mm-hmm. This directly impacts the competition among the players, and it plays a vital role on winning over customers. The trend also shows that the importance of having green logistics is increasing rapidly. Apart from the market share itself, the regulations are another reasons for businesses to move towards green logistics. We see that policies in respect to environmental aspects is one of the main topics of debates for many governments and also at an international level. The targets and regulations are being updated rather rapidly. Now, if these measures are enough or feasible is a separate question, but clearly businesses need to prepare themselves if they want to compete in the market for long term.
And so what is the possible action that company can take to start the initiative of the green logistics? So probably you can share your experience in the past when successfully delivering this project with the Ponera Group.
Generally, going towards green logistics is a step-by-step process that requires collaboration from many parties. Mm-hmm. And that can be easily explained by how complex the logistics networks are. Keeping this in mind, I believe companies can flourish innovation and development on moving towards green logistics by implementing policies that support more sustainable activities and also taking the risk on testing new solutions. Of course, there are risks to test these new solutions, and there can be many challenges, especially when we are talking about implementing new systems or changing operations either partially or completely. One way to mitigate such risk is to implement the new solutions in low volumes, or what can be called as pilot testing. This is exactly what we experienced with Ponera Group. Even though our modular pallet system does not really require dramatic changes in operations, but the assumptions prior to implementation rises the uncertainty on the impact. So it is important to bear in mind that in pilot projects, even though the volumes are low, but at the same time, the volume should be above a certain threshold in order to get meaningful insights on integration and the scale up of the solution. This threshold is highly dependent on the solution and the target industry. Therefore, there is a need for transparent and efficient communication between the innovators and their clients to increase the chances of succeeding in pilot programs.
Interesting. Masoud, many people saying that sustainable logistics is no longer optional. It is a necessity and now it becomes the norm. So how do you see this statement?
I admit that I completely agree with this statement. Earlier, we discussed about what are the benefits of green logistics and why does it matter.
Yeah.
I mentioned that, in my opinion, the demand from consumer side and the governmental regulations are two main drivers on pushing towards green logistics. Looking at it in the context of business, these two factors mean that if companies want to stay relevant in their competition, they must consider sustainability in their strategy. And one of the aspects where sustainability is urgently needed and can create the highest impact is in logistics. So I completely agree with this statement.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. All right. So to wrap up today's discussion, what is the key message that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Maybe I can emphasize 2 points for the ending of this conversation. We just need to be patient and focus on our goals. Policies and investments that facilitate implementation of green logistics can bring extraordinary benefits for societies in a global level. Second point, and my final point, is more towards my fellow entrepreneurs and innovators. On any of our innovations in the field of green logistics, we need to keep in mind the three pillars of environment, economy, and society. We need to formulate our solutions in respect to these three pillars if we want to increase the chances of providing successful technologies to the market. I couldn't emphasize more how important these three pillars are. And finally, I want to thank you, Nur Hadi, for creating such a great podcast. I absolutely love it and enjoy every episode when it is out. Well done for the great job. Keep rocking.
At Bichara Supply Chain, we are committed to driving global perspective to embrace technological adaptation in improving process efficiencies. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share Bichara Supply Chain. And stay tuned for the latest updates. To learn more, visit our website www.bicharasupplychain.com. Thank you for listening to us. We look forward to seeing you at our next episode.